It's 2012, it's raining outside, and you've just come home from school and you run to turn on the Xbox 360. You see a party invite straight away from your friend to jump on the new Call of Duty. After hours of playing, no matter winning or losing, you're still having fun. When your friend comes off for dinner, you decide to jump on a game like Skyrim for a couple of hours and just enjoy some fantasy fun. Finding the massive world impressive, but not being aware of why you find it so impressive or even immersive. The childhood naivety of gaming is something that I think all of us wish we could just fall back into. I remember when the Assassin's Creed 3 trailer came out and I was so hyped to play this game. It would have been the first Assassin's Creed game that I was playing that I knew about before it was coming up to release. So I was hyped, and leading up to it, one of the biggest channels on YouTube at the time, Smosh, made a music video talking about it, and it just kind of brought in even more hype for the game. I asked my mum if she could pre-order the game from Argos for me so that the day it came out I could just jump straight into it. Then the day finally came. 20th of October 2012, Assassin's Creed 3 finally came out. It was one of the biggest step-ups in the franchise since the second game. I would wake up an hour earlier before school just so that I could play it before going. I remember walking around the snow in New York area, turning off my console to then walk in the snow as well at school. This was at the time where in the UK it actually snowed during the winter, which is something that rarely happens now. All of this childhood nostalgia mixed with naivety of the gaming world, all mixed well together to have the most fun possible, even by yourself. With every game coming out being a step up from the prior, you had AC1 to AC2 to Brotherhood. All three games were just a one-up of each other in some level. Where they then jumped to 3, where it took what they already knew and worked to make it something even better. Which at the time wasn't viewed that way, but in fact, looking back, was actually a great experience. Each Call of Duty was a step up from the next. Halo 4 became bigger in every single way from Halo 3. GTA 5 was one of the biggest jumps in gaming that we've ever seen and probably won't see until GTA 6. And then we also had many new IPs entering the franchise, and we had so many amazing games coming out within this time period of games like The Last of Us, GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Dishonored, Shadow of Mordor, Borderlands 2, then leading to games at mid of that decade coming out with stuff like The Witcher 3. For me, I would class 2010 to 2015 as the Renaissance era of gaming, letting the art drive the ship, whereas during 2016 to 2021 became the Industrial Revolution, where they were able to just churn out games and make a profit, going higher and higher every single time, testing tons of systems to see which way they could make more money. At the time, we were fine with it, as generally there wasn't a ton of backlash, but all of that would end up ending by 2018, where people started to realise truly what was happening. That was due to the success of one primary game. Obviously there was some backlash before it, but Fortnite blew up and everyone was going a bit crazy. A game that sure was made by one of the biggest companies in gaming, but at the time when it came out, the first 4 seasons of this game was extremely unpolished and very basic. But it was doing better than every single COD game that had come out from the 3 years prior. How did a free-to-play game outperform the rest in this entire market? Well, I think one of the first things to consider obviously is the low barrier to entry. Just owning a console of some sort allowed you to play it, and the childhood fun coming back once again for the masses to be able to compete side by side in a gaming world that really we hadn't been in for so long. You could just jump on and your friends or just by yourself and have tons of fun. When I was younger, I remember being able to play for hours on end without any issues. I'd be able to jump on at 4 PM right after school and then play every single night until 10 or 11 PM. I was able to do this because everything was new. I wanted to be better than all of my friends no matter what. I never wanted to be on the same level as them in terms of a competitive standpoint. I simply enjoyed everything I played because my friends also played tons of them. It wasn't just online games that was the case either. That was also single player games. Being able to walk to school, for example, or watch videos on YouTube talking about gaming, and whilst it was in its prime, especially back then when YouTube gaming was blowing up and becoming the main course of everything going on in life, at least for obviously people who are between the ages of like 10 and 15. And now I can maybe play a game for like an hour, then I'm wanting to come off. Why is that? Well, I think the first way of discussing that primary topic is going to be talking about the modern day state of gaming across the board. I feel like gaming has hit a plateau where it's the same as the tech world, where gaming and tech can't really improve massively between each entry. It is slow changes over time, whereas back in the day, every game was a step up in terms of graphics, storytelling, everything, but really, one of those can still be improved no matter what, but they just choose to ignore it. Every new iPhone or Samsung phone are always improved from the last, but by such small margins that really it doesn't warrant having an entirely brand new phone every single year. But why do we end up feeling like every single phone has changed every single year? It's because they decide to change it physically, so it looks like there is a big change. With games, it's the exact same issue. Just replace the iPhone with COD and Samsung with 90% of the AAA titles that are coming out. The reason why this became such a massive issue is that companies didn't want to move the ball forward at all. They only wanted to move an inch if that meant that they made millions from that tiny change. The big issue with the gaming world was when it became such a pathological idea behind money making over the creativity and love for the craft that completely got obliterated once companies realized how much money there is in the gaming sphere. The people who make the decisions at these big companies typically don't play games, and if they do, maybe they play it every now and again, or they play it with their kids or grandkids. People who went to uni for game development, or people who got into voice acting because they loved games, just ended up being destroyed by the machine that is modern day gaming. Companies like Ubisoft and Activision know that they'll make a load of money by putting out a load of subpar games instead of risking it to make even more money because they make an amazing game. Last year was the first ever time Activision decided to take a year off of making Call of Duty games. It was the same for Ubisoft, because back when they released Assassin's Creed Syndicate, it was met with a lot of backlash because there was nothing changing in the franchise. They took a year off and released Origins, a game that to this day I still think is one of the best Assassin's Creed games. Which is overall a good thing. Them taking a year off is proof that they know that something needed to change. Work had to be put in to release good games. But due to the corporatization and the lack of willingness to try new projects, people ended up with the same game that was slightly improved year to year. Now we're at the point where games just can't improve dramatically when it comes to the graphics or audio. The quality is pretty much as high as it can be. The only way that games can improve now is by having a compelling story and world design that's actually intriguing to run around. I end up finding myself wanting to run around Elden Ring, for example, a game that I suck at, I get destroyed in. I do not do well in Souls-like games. However, there is something about the world design in that game that is phenomenal in comparison to all of the Ubisoft games when it comes to the new generation Assassin's Creed. I don't want to run around Viking England in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where the world is so dull that you end up putting your horse into auto sprint and looking at TikTok or YouTube for 15 minutes until your horse gets to your destination. But it's not just down to the creative compression that's gone on within the gaming world, but it's also the fact that there's a lack of just excitement for new releases in the gaming world right now. Now, the lack of care for the new releases to me comes down to two main things. One is just growing up, and the second thing, like I've previously discussed, when you were a kid, everything you played was new. Everything was always a brand new experience. When I played GTA 4 when I was younger, I thought that that was the only thing of its kind. But that was the fourth game in the main line of the franchise. When I played Saints Row 2 for the first time, I loved that game, and that's the only Saints Row game that I truly enjoyed. But at that point of time, again, I thought that that was the only thing like it and that there was no way of improving it. But then after growing up, you start to realize things. For example, the Saints Row franchise all take massive inspiration from GTA. Skyrim was the fifth game in a 2-decade-long franchise, but to me it was the first of its kind. I could keep going with a mixture of childish ignorance about the world itself and the lack of knowledge in the gaming world specifically. But due to the lack of knowledge, it actually made gaming a great experience, and I think this is something that people don't talk about when they're talking about the nostalgia of games. They solely put it down to we just loved the games when we were growing up, but it's because those experiences were new experiences to us. We didn't have a critical eye at that point. A lot of people try to defend the stance that it's not because we grew up, it's just that games became stale and boring. I agree with half of that statement. The half that I agree with is the stale and boring part of the statement. However, I do also think that people who complain about games being bad are a lot of the time the people who also play the same types of games over and over again, such as the FPS types. When the new COD game isn't good, they believe that gaming is ruined. When Halo is boring, they believe again the industry sucks and that everything about it is bad. But instead of them taking some time out of their days to play something really interesting and play an amazing story-rich game that came before many of the COD games, for example, or Even games recent, like Red Dead 2, where you get an amazing story, they don't want to do that because they view it as a waste of time. Why would they spend so many hours in a game like Red Dead when really they could play COD every hour every day and apparently get the same level of fun? Another part of getting older is the realization that gaming truly doesn't matter. Before you start writing in the comment sections about how you're a 25 or 40-year-old man who loves playing games and still talks about it all the time, just remember that you are not the majority of people. Most men and women do not care about games in the first place, let alone started playing them. It's not until really my generation, which is, for example, Gen Z and millennials, where you have that barrier where so many people played games. I remember so many people in school who played games. This was across the board, no matter who they were. They tried playing games because it was a great hobby to play when you're younger. You could sink so much time into it. With a lot of people holding the belief of gaming being dead comes down to the realization that gaming truly doesn't matter. Adulting starts to kick in and you become aware of a lot more things outside of this bubble that most of us who loved games growing up were sat in for so long. Now, what you should and shouldn't care about is not what I'm talking about here. I believe that gaming is obviously a hobby. It's something that should be put in and categorized as such. For example, a lot of people who say the words gaming is a waste of time also are the same sorts of people who go and spend 2 hours of their life watching a football match every Saturday, then discussing it for hours on end throughout the week, and they basically become walking contradictions. It's depressing, but becoming aware that responsibility strips us of our innate childlike persona that will always be there, but only comes out of very specific things, as we've basically been trained most of our lives to put that aside, because obviously we have to start stepping up to becoming an adult. A big part of adulting is that realization of how much games cost. How is The Last of Us Part 1 £70? It's a remake, sure, but come on, that's ridiculous. Overall, it's not just because it's the same game from before, just with updated graphics. That's not my issue with the game. It's the fact that £70 is a ridiculous amount of money to be paying for a game. Sure, people may use the argument of, well, you go out and you spend £70 on stuff. Currently, I don't. I still have no money. Most of my money is gone purely because, guess what? My car costs over £70 to fill up. It's stupid. It's not even like you could turn around and say, well, the cost of everything's going up, so we need to start charging the game more. Because it's not that. Most of these games that come out at £70 already have a ridiculous amount of monetization in them. It makes people not want to play games because there's such a high barrier to entry now that you have to pay £70 to play a game, and even £50 for some games is ridiculous. How is, for example, many of the Nintendo games still at their ridiculously high price tag when they're like 5 years old? It's absurd. As let's say you're earning £1,200 a month, maybe £1,500 a month. The average salary, for example, in the UK, if you're on a living wage, you're going to be getting just around £1,500. That is living wage, that's not minimum, so you'll be taking home less than that if you just go off of minimum wage. It still ends up becoming a massive chunk of your money from all of the money that you end up having left over after all of your bills. I still live with my parents and will do for some time. I know that I will not be able to afford the newest games right away all the time. It's something that I've had to come to accept. When after everything comes out of my account, I'm only left with like £120 to maybe £200 a month, and paying £60 for a game just isn't doable. Everything is going up in price, so I'm not fully surprised, obviously. Like, yes, I said earlier how, for example, it's ridiculous because everything's going in price, you can't use that as an argument. But again, it's like one of those things where people can use it and people will defend that argument, so I guess, sure. But when you consider that there's so many multiplayer titles out there that make tons of money, that have not needed to increase the price. Let's talk about two of the most popular games in history, Fortnite and Minecraft. Fortnite and Minecraft, for example, are, like I said, two of the most profitable games in history to ever be made. One of them is free and makes tons of money from microtransactions. I'm fine with that being a system that earns money. The game initially is free, you don't need to buy the microtransactions. You're getting value for literally paying nothing. I don't believe all games should be free, so don't worry, don't take it like that. I believe games should be charged for. But when games make tons of money, and Epic has proved this point, Fortnite has made so much money they didn't need the game to be paid for in the first place. The other, for example, was at £16 for the first 5 years of this game coming out. The game currently is £20. It is £20 and it still ends up selling tons every year. But how did a game that is £16 per game that you're buying of Minecraft end up becoming one of the most profitable games in history? So it can be done as long as games are actually good enough, have a great gameplay loop, and there is actually quality changes that are happening. It doesn't need to always be about making your game as profitable as possible. Releasing a new Call of Duty every year at £60 a year, charging a ridiculous amount of money for season passes, and then shoving in tons of microtransactions. The games don't need to be like that. Focus on making a good game first, and then you can justify charging that money. Like I previously discussed, I do believe one of the biggest issues in gaming right now is the creativity being stomped out by monetary gain, as both should work in tandem together. The better your game is, the higher chances it will sell well. Good reviews end up turning into more and more money. It's a blatantly obvious fact that has been shown time and time again, which is a shift I think we might be seeing and I will discuss in a moment, but that is not where we're at right now. But the last 2 points that I want to make when it comes to gaming today is the lack of fun and how the older I get, the more critical I became of games. Now the first part I think is something that a lot of us can agree on no matter what, which is that gaming just isn't as fun anymore to play for long periods of time. I can't play games for more than 2 hours at a time without feeling either drained or as if I've just wasted 2 hours of my life. The only time that doesn't happen is if I had a really great time. Be that with my friends or a game that's been so compelling, when I end up turning it off, I just want to continue playing, which again has been very rare over the last 5 years. When my friends end up playing games for like 4 hours straight, it just feels weird to me now. I used to be able to do it so much and I just can't now. I've got a bad relationship when it comes to productivity within games, which I've discussed previously, but I will make a video on at some point. But when it comes to it, I just end up feeling annoyed at myself, typically because I feel like I've wasted time. But also, I always end up on edge afterwards just because of the way I have to be like zoned in so heavily with games for me to care about them in any way. Everything about me when I play games just becomes more negative, and this is an issue that's not just with me. The amount of times I have conversations with people who talk about quitting games, and from my own experience of when I quit for like half a year during 2019, I end up thinking back to that time quite often, and I just think about how generally I was a lot happier. Maybe that's because gaming is more of an addiction for me, and that I have to try and toe the line between it and not let it spiral. But really, I don't know. I could be addicted to games, and that's the reason why I have a negative issue and try my best not to play them as much. I know that I sink too much time into them when I get into them, and that's why I typically don't let myself play games that much. But then there's the critical side. I became more critical of games over the years, and now I have a channel where the main piece of content that I focus on is big video game essays. But when you get older, you start to realize more and more about the gaming world as a whole than you ever saw beforehand when you were younger. You see the legalities of it, the acquisitions, the way staff get treated, and much more, and it ends up giving you such a negative point of view on many different games that the younger version of your naive self that used to trash on games like Call of Duty Ghosts, for example, because your favorite YouTuber was telling you it's awful, just didn't know about. You're basically ending up falling into the trap of everyone else's belief systems, obviously, because that's just how things work anyway, but in turn, it's something that all of us fall into the trap of nowadays. If a game gets released and it doesn't live up to an expectation that you had, even if they didn't set that expectation, you'll have a critical viewpoint of it. And then obviously you have the latter half of people's viewpoints, which is the idea that you should just be grateful for what you got, which is a stance that I don't agree with either. All of this ends up adding up until the day that you feel as if everything you dislike has a justifiable criticism. And now we just end up playing games and hope that we're going to be able to catch lightning in a bottle twice and relive our childhood, and to be honest, as bad as it is to say, it just won't ever happen.